Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into something solid, something that still stands when you lean against it. We're talking about 1950s homes, the ones built with 2x4s that actually measure 2x4, the ones with plaster walls thick enough to muffle your neighbour's entire existence. The ones where the foundation was poured by men who believed buildings should outlast their grandchildren. These aren't just houses. They're time capsules of an era when shortcuts weren't industry standard, and planned obsolescence hadn't been invented yet. Before we dive in, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy these strange little journeys through time where nostalgia meets insomnia in a dimly lit hallway. And thank you truly to the person who suggested this topic. Your ideas shape this channel in ways that matter more than algorithms ever could. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and whether your own home creaks in that good solid way, or in that concerning modern way. And hey, we're now live on Spotify, so if you want to drift off to these stories there, the link is waiting in the description. Now dim the lights, switch on a fan for that soft white noise, wiggle down under your blanket, and get comfortable. Really comfortable. Like you're not moving for 8 hours unless there's an actual emergency. Because tonight we're exploring a world where carpenters measured twice and cut once, where foundation concrete was mixed thick enough to survive nuclear paranoia, and where homes were built by men who smoked unfiltered cigarettes and somehow still lived to see their great-grandchildren graduate college. Have you ever wondered what made those old houses so different? What was in the lumber that isn't in the lumber now? Why do 1950s walls feel like they could stop a freight train while modern drywall crumbles if you look at it wrong? What did those builders know that we've somehow forgotten? How did they manage to construct homes that are still standing, still solid, still worth renovating, while houses built last year are already settling in ways that make insurance adjusters nervous? And more importantly, could you build a house like that today? Would you even be allowed to, with modern codes, modern materials, and modern timelines that treat construction like a race instead of a craft? Well, congratulations, you've just woken up in 1953. There's a man on your block framing a house, and the sound of his hammer carries 3 streets over. The lumber smells like actual trees. The concrete truck just pulled up, and the driver's checking the mix with his hands because that's how you know it's right. And the house they're building? It's going to outlive everyone involved. Good luck keeping up. Let's start with what holds everything up. In 1953, when a contractor pours a foundation, he's not racing a clock or cutting corners to meet a deadline that some investor dreamed up in a boardroom. He's mixing concrete so thick you could build a bomb shelter with it, because half the neighbourhood probably has one anyway. The concrete truck arrives early, before the sun gets too high, and starts working against the pour. The driver backs up carefully, watching the foreman's hand signals, stopping exactly where the chute needs to be. The mix coming out of that truck is different from what you'd see today. It's heavier, denser, loaded with more cement and less air. You can see it in the way it flows, thick and slow, like dark honey that's been left in the cupboard too long. The crew spreads it with shovels and rakes, working it into the forms that were built yesterday from actual lumber, not the engineered panels that will be invented later. These forms are strong enough to hold back the weight without bowing, without leaking, without any of the anxiety that comes with modern pours where you're never quite sure if everything will hold. Someone's in the trench with a vibrator, working out the air pockets, making sure the concrete flows into every corner, around every rebar rod. There's rebar everywhere, more than the plans call for because the foreman believes in insurance. The steel grid looks like something designed to survive an earthquake, and in a way, that's exactly what it is. The concrete settles into place with a weight you can feel through your boots if you're standing close enough. It fills the forms completely, level, with the top smooth where it needs to be smooth. The finishers move across the surface with trowels and floats, working the cream to the top, creating a finish that will stay level for 70 years. Nobody's leaving until the pour is right, There's no clock-out time that matters more than getting this foundation correct, because everyone here understands what's riding on it. Every wall, every floor, every roof beam, everything that comes after depends on these few hours of work done right. The foreman walks the perimeter one more time, checking corners with a string line, verifying that everything is square, level, true. He's done this 100 times, but he checks anyway, because that's what you do when your name is attached to the work. By late afternoon, the concrete is starting to set, transforming from liquid to solid, beginning its long process of curing into something that will outlast everyone involved in pouring it. In a few days, they'll strip the forms and you'll see the result. Walls 16 inches thick, footings that spread the weight across twice the area they need to, a foundation that looks like it was designed to support a building 3 times this size. Because in 1953, over-engineering isn't a waste, it's insurance, it's pride. It's the difference between a foundation that cracks after the first hard freeze and one that's still holding steady 70 years later, when someone's great-granddaughter is renovating the kitchen and the inspector keeps saying the same thing. The foundation is perfect. Don't touch it. They don't make them like this anymore. And he's right. They don't. The 2x4s stacked outside the construction site smell like the forest they came from last month. They're dense, heavy, still slightly damp from the mill. When the carpenter lifts one onto his shoulder, it doesn't flex like a diving board. It sits solid, substantial, the kind of wood that makes you believe in the concept of permanence. This lumber came from old-growth forests, trees that took a century to reach harvest size. The growth rings are tight, close together, visible proof that these trees grew slowly in forests thick enough that they had to compete for sunlight. That slow growth created wood so dense that driving a nail requires real effort, not the easy punch-through of modern lumber that's more air than fibre. The carpenter runs his hand along a stud before lifting it into place. The surface is rough sawn in spots, smooth planed in others, and when he sights down its length checking for straightness, he nods with satisfaction. It's straight because the mill took time to dry it properly, stacked it with spacers so air could circulate, let it season until the moisture content dropped to where it needed to be. Modern lumber is kiln-dried in days, rushed through the process until it's dry enough to sell but not stable enough to stay straight. This lumber was air-dried for months, allowed to acclimate naturally, to surrender its moisture slowly without warping or twisting or developing the kind of internal stresses that show up later as cracks and bows. When he nails it into place, the carpenter uses real nails, thick ones, driven with a hammer that has weight and balance. 3 hits per nail, maybe 4. The nail sinks deep, biting into wood that accepts it and holds it like the nail has always been there. There's no nail gun, no compressed air, no rapid-fire assembly that sounds efficient but leaves half the nails sitting crooked or driven too deep. The framing goes up slowly, deliberately. Each stud is checked with a level before it's secured. Each corner is verified square. The carpenter marks his measurements with a pencil worn down to a stub, makes his cuts with a handsaw that requires muscle and attention, carries each piece to where it needs to go instead of tossing it across the floor. By the end of the day, you can walk through the framing and feel how solid it is. The walls don't shudder when you push on them. The corners are tight, square, reinforced with blocking that wasn't in the plans, but went in anyway because that's how you build things that last. The whole structure smells like sawdust and sap, like something alive that's been transformed into shelter. This wood will still be here in 70 years, still straight, still solid, still doing its job without complaint. The carpenter who installed it will be long gone, but his work will remain, visible in every wall, every corner, every joint that stayed tight through decades of seasons and settlements and the slow, patient work of time. Before drywall became the default, there was plaster, thick, heavy, applied in layers over wooden lath strips that gave it something to grip. When the plasterer smooths his trowel across the wall, he's creating a surface that will harden into something closer to stone than paper, something that will still be there 70 years later, refusing to dent when you bump it with furniture. The lath goes up first, thin wooden strips nailed horizontally across the studs with gaps between each one. The gaps are crucial because the plaster will squeeze through them and form keys on the back side. Mechanical locks that hold everything together. This isn't glue or adhesive relying on chemical bonds that can fail. This is physical grip, like interlocking fingers. The plasterer mixes his material in a trough, adding water to the lime and sand until the consistency feels right under his trowel. He's done this long enough that he doesn't measure. He knows by feel, by the way it spreads, by how it holds on the trowel when he lifts it. This is craft, not science, though there's plenty of science happening in the chemical reactions that will turn this wet mixture into hardened stone. He applies the first coat, called the scratch coat, pressing it through the lath gaps so it mushrooms out on the backside. When it starts to set, he scratches it with a rake, creating horizontal grooves that the next coat will key into. It has to cure before he comes back, has to dry and harden and develop enough strength to support the next layer. The second coat, the brown coat, goes on thicker, building up the wall to nearly its final thickness. The plasterer works section by section, spreading the material with long, smooth strokes, checking with a straight edge to make sure the surface is flat. Any low spots get filled. Any high spots get scraped down. The wall is taking shape now, transforming from exposed lath to something that looks almost finished. The final coat, the finish coat, is thinner, smoother, almost white. This is where the skill shows. The plasterer works it with a trowel that's been worn smooth from years of use, spreading the material thin and even, creating a surface so smooth it barely needs sanding. In the corners, where walls meet ceiling, he works carefully, precisely, making sure the angles are crisp and clean. When he's finished, the wall is 3/4 of an inch thick, sometimes more. It's dense enough that when you knock on it, the sound is solid, dead, completely unlike the hollow boom of drywall. Sound doesn't travel through these walls easily. Music from one room stays in that room. Conversations remain private. The house feels quieter, more peaceful, insulated not just from temperature but from noise. These walls will take paint beautifully, hold nails without crumbling, survive decades of normal wear without cracking or denting. When someone finally decides to renovate 70 years from now, they'll discover that removing plaster walls requires a sledgehammer and serious commitment, because what went up easy isn't coming down easy. This isn't temporary. This is architecture that meant to stay. Underneath the living room carpet that won't be installed for another decade, there are oak planks 3/4 of an inch thick. They're nailed into place with real nails, not the pneumatic staples that barely hold, and when you walk across them barefoot 60 years from now, they'll creak in that good, solid way that tells you they're still doing their job. The flooring arrives in bundles, each plank tongue and grooved on the edges, cut from white oak or red oak, sometimes maple if the homeowner wants something harder. The wood is already finished at the mill, pre-sanded smooth, sealed with multiple coats of varnish that will protect it for years. This isn't raw lumber that needs finishing after installation. This is flooring ready to walk on the moment it's down. The floor installer starts in one corner, laying the first plank perfectly straight, because everything after depends on getting this one right. He checks it with a chalk line, adjusts it a fraction of an inch, then nails it down with cut nails that grip the subfloor like they're angry about something. Each nail goes in at an angle through the tongue, hidden by the next plank that slides into place. He works across the room, plank by plank, tapping. each one tight against the last with a rubber mallet and a scrap block that protects the tongue. The fit is precise, tight enough that you can barely see the seam, loose enough that the wood has room to expand and contract with the seasons without buckling. This is craftsmanship that understands wood is alive, still moving, still responding to moisture and temperature even after it's been cut and milled and installed. In the doorways, he cuts each plank to fit exactly, notching around the door frame, making sure the transition is smooth and clean. There are no transition strips, no metal thresholds, just wood meeting wood in joints so tight they look like they grew that way. The corners are the same, each plank cut to fit precisely, the gaps so small they're invisible unless you get down on your knees and look close. The whole room takes days, not hours. The installer won't be rushed, won't sacrifice quality for speed, won't leave gaps or loose boards or any of the shortcuts that show up in modern installations, where speed matters more than permanence. When he's finished, the floor is level, solid, beautiful, in the way that simple, honest materials are beautiful when they're installed correctly. This floor will survive generations. It will hold up under decades of foot traffic, furniture being moved, children playing, dogs running, all the normal chaos of family life. The finish will wear in the high traffic areas, sure, but the wood underneath will remain solid, dense, unaffected. Someone will refinish it eventually, sanding away the decades to reveal fresh wood underneath, and they'll discover that these planks are thick enough to be sanded 5 or 6 times before they get too thin. That's the difference. Modern flooring is thin, engineered, designed to look good for 15 years before it needs replacing. This flooring was designed to last until your great-grandchildren sell the house. The windows going into this house are made of wood so dense it feels like holding a small piece of furniture. The glass is thick, slightly wavy if you look close enough, and when the glazier sets each pane into its frame, he's using putty that will harden into a seal that actually seals, not the synthetic strips that shrink and crack after 5 winters. Each window is built like a piece of furniture because that's essentially what it is. The frame is mortised and tenoned at the corners, joints that interlock mechanically, reinforced with glue and wooden pegs. The sash that holds the glass is made the same way, carefully fitted so it slides smoothly in its track without binding or leaving gaps that let in drafts. The glazier works carefully, setting each pane of glass into its rabbited groove, bedding it in a thin layer of putty that will cushion it and seal it. He presses the glass firmly but gently, making sure it's seated completely, then secures it with glazier's points, small metal triangles that hold the glass in place while the putty cures. More putty goes on the outside, smoothed with a putty knife into a neat bevel that sheds water away from the glass. The glass itself is real glass, thick and solid, with enough weight that you can feel it when you lift a pane. It's not the thin, flexible glass that will be manufactured later, the stuff that sounds hollow when you tap it. This glass is substantial, and when you look through it, the world outside is clear and sharp, maybe slightly wavy near the edges where the manufacturing process left its signature, but honest and real in a way that modern glass somehow isn't. The window frame gets painted before installation, multiple coats of oil-based paint that soaks into the wood and creates a barrier against moisture. The sash gets painted too, carefully, making sure paint doesn't get into the tracks where it would bind. When the paint dries, the whole assembly is solid, protected, ready to face decades of weather without rotting or warping or failing. Installation takes time. The window has to be shimmed level and plumb, checked and rechecked before it's secured. The gaps around the frame get packed with oakum or cotton batting, then sealed with more paint. The trim goes on last, mitered precisely at the corners, nailed in place with finished nails that disappear under a final coat of paint. These windows will open and close smoothly for decades. The ropes and pulleys that counterbalance the sash will last long enough that most people will forget how they work. The the glass will stay. Clear and unbroken through countless storms, the frames will remain square and solid, and when someone finally decides to replace them with modern vinyl windows, they'll need a crowbar and determination, because what went in solid is staying solid. The difference is simple. These windows were built to be repaired, not replaced. The sash can be taken apart and reglued. The glass can be replaced if it breaks. The ropes can be restrung. Every part is serviceable, fixable, designed with the understanding that windows should last as long as the house they're installed in. Up on the peak, the roofers are laying asphalt shingles that weigh 3 times what modern shingles do. Each one is thick, reinforced with layers of felt and tar, designed not just to cover the roof but to protect it, to create a barrier so effective that the wood underneath will stay dry for decades, untouched by rot or mould or the kind of water damage that turns attics into science experiments. The work starts with the sheathing. Solid planks nailed across the rafters, each board tight against the next. This isn't plywood or OSB, those engineered products that will be invented later and marketed as improvements, but will delaminate the first time they get wet. This is real lumber, 1x6s or 1x8s, creating a solid deck that could support the weight of the entire crew without flexing. Over the sheathing goes tar paper, heavy black felt saturated with asphalt, rolled out in overlapping courses that shed water like shingles themselves. Each course overlaps the one below by at least 6 inches, creating a redundant waterproof layer that serves as insurance against any shingle that might fail. The paper is tacked in place temporarily, just enough to hold it until the shingles go on. The shingles themselves are heavy enough that carrying a bundle up the ladder requires actual effort. Each shingle is thick 3-tab design, coated with mineral granules that will protect the asphalt from UV damage and give the roof its colour. They're not the thin, flexible shingles that will dominate the market in 50 years, the ones that curl and crack and need replacing every 15 years. These are built to last 30 years, maybe 40 if the roof faces north and doesn't take full sun all day. The roofer starts at the bottom edge, working his way up, each course overlapping the one below. The shingles are nailed with galvanized roofing nails, 4 per shingle, placed precisely so the next course covers them. No nail heads are exposed. Everything is sealed, layered, designed to shed water no matter which direction the wind is blowing. At the peak, where 2 roof planes meet, a ridge vent will be installed later, but for now, the roofer just makes sure the shingles from each side overlap properly, creating a waterproof seal. The valleys, where water will concentrate during storms, get extra attention, lined with metal flashing that's soldered at the seams and extends well under the shingles on both sides. Around the chimney, the flashing is stepped, each piece overlapping the one below, tucked under shingles and mortared into the brick. This is the detail that separates good roofs from bad ones, and the roofer takes his time making sure every edge is sealed, every potential leak path is blocked. By the time he's finished, the roof is a system, not just a covering. Multiple layers of protection, redundant water barriers, properly installed flashing at every transition and penetration. This roof will keep the house dry through decades of storms, will shed snow without damage, will survive hail that would destroy modern roofing. When someone inspects this roof 70 years from now, they'll find shingles that are worn but still functional, flashing that's still sealed, and sheathing underneath that's dry and solid, because the roof did its job. The electrician wiring this house treats every connection like it's going into his own mother's bedroom. He wraps each wire junction with electrical tape so thoroughly it looks like a small cocoon, tests every outlet twice, and installs a breaker box built from metal so heavy you could use it as a boat anchor. Nothing in this system is disposable or temporary. Everything is meant to last. The wire itself is copper, solid copper, Not the aluminum that will be tried and abandoned in a few decades after it causes enough house fires to become an insurance problem. Each wire is sheathed in cloth-wrapped rubber insulation, not the cheapest plastic that will become brittle and crack after 20 years. The wire is substantial, thick enough that you can feel the quality when you handle it. The electrician drills through the centre of each stud, running the wire through the framing in straight lines that make sense, that can be traced and understood by whoever comes after him. He's not drilling randomly or running wire along the path of least resistance. He's creating a system that's logical, organised, serviceable decades from now when someone needs to add a circuit or troubleshoot a problem. Each junction box is metal, thick gauge steel that's screwed securely to a stud or joist. The boxes are sized properly, with room for the connections and enough wire to work with. Modern boxes will be plastic, cramped, barely big enough to hold the connections they're supposed to contain. These boxes are generous, practical, designed by someone who understood that electricians have fingers and need space to work. Inside each box, the connections are made carefully. Wires are stripped to exactly the right length, twisted together clockwise so they tighten when the wire nut goes on, not counterclockwise, which works them loose. Each connection is tugged to make sure it's solid, then wrapped with electrical tape for extra insurance. The electrician knows that a loose connection creates resistance, resistance creates heat, and heat creates fires. The outlets and switches are commercial grade, heavy enough that they have real weight when you hold them. The contacts are thick brass that will handle decades of use without wearing out. The mounting screws are steel, not the pot metal that will strip out if you look at it wrong. Everything is built to be used repeatedly without failure. The breaker box is a work of art. Each circuit labelled clearly in pencil on the door, each breaker properly sized for the wire it's protecting. The main breaker is substantial, mounted at the top, with enough capacity to handle the load plus room to grow. The whole panel is organised, logical, the work of someone who takes pride in installation that's clean and professional. When the inspection happens, the inspector barely glances at the work, because he knows this electrician, knows his reputation, knows that everything will be correct because this man doesn't do work any other way. The inspection sticker goes on, the walls can be closed up, and the system will work flawlessly for decades before anyone needs to think about it again. The pipes going into the walls are copper, thick-walled, soldered at every joint with the kind of careful precision that suggests the plumber has both pride and patience. These aren't the thin plastic lines that will crack when the temperature drops or the quick connect fittings that weep slowly behind drywall until the damage is catastrophic. These are pipes that will still be here when your grandchildren sell the house. The plumber starts in the basement, running the main supply line from the water meter to the far corners of the house. The pipe is type L copper, thick enough that you can hold a 10-foot length in the middle and it barely flexes. Each section is cut with a tubing cutter that leaves a clean, square edge, then deburred inside and out so there's nothing to restrict flow or cause turbulence. The joints are soldered, not glued or crimped or pushed together with rubber O-rings that will eventually dry out and leak. The plumber cleans each joint with emery cloth until the copper shines, brushes on flux that will help the solder flow, then heats the joint with a torch until the copper is hot enough that the solder melts on contact and gets pulled into the joint by capillary action. Each joint gets enough solder to fill the gap completely, but not so much that it creates a blob inside that restricts flow. The plumber wipes each joint with a rag while it's still hot, cleaning off the excess flux and leaving behind a neat ring of solder that shows the joint is complete. When it cools, that joint is stronger than the pipe itself. It will never leak, never fail, never need attention. The drain lines are cast iron, heavy enough that installing them is a two-man job. The pipes are joined with hubbed fittings, each joint packed with oakum and sealed with molten lead that's poured in place and tamped down to create a waterproof seal. These drains will outlast the house, will never crack or separate or develop the kind of slow leaks that rot out floor joists and subflooring. In the walls, the pipes are secured with straps every few feet, held firmly but not so tight that they can't expand and contract with temperature changes. The plumber knows that copper moves when hot water runs through it, and pipes that can't move will eventually work their fittings loose. The straps have cushioning, felt, or rubber that prevents the pipes from rattling against the studs when water flows. The fixtures are commercial grade, the kind installed in schools and office buildings, built to handle decades of use without wearing out. The faucets have brass bodies and ceramic valve seats that won't drip after a few years. The toilets are cast iron with thick vitreous china bowls that will chip if you drop a wrench in them, but will never crack from normal use. Everything is tested before the walls close up. The plumber pressurizes the system, checks every joint for leaks, makes sure every fixture works properly. Nothing gets hidden until he's certain it's right, because he knows his reputation depends on the system working flawlessly for decades. Insulation in 1953 isn't spray foam or fiberglass batting that compresses into uselessness after a decade. It's rock wool, dense and fireproof, or cellulose blown so thick into the walls that the house holds temperature the way a thermos holds coffee. When winter comes, the furnace won't run constantly because the walls actually remember what insulation is supposed to do. The insulation contractor arrives with bags of rock wool, mineral fibre that looks like cotton candy but feels like steel wool when you touch it. The material is made from molten rock spun into fibres, non-combustible, resistant to moisture, dense enough that it doesn't settle or compact over time. This isn't the pink fluffy stuff that will dominate the market in 20 years and turn into a compressed mat that insulates about as well as a wool sweater. In the walls, the rock wool is friction fit between the studs, each bat cut precisely to fit the cavity completely. The contractor takes his time, making sure there are no gaps, no compressed areas, no places where air can move freely and carry heat with it. Around windows and doors, he cuts small pieces to fill the irregular spaces, packing them firmly but not so tight that he compresses the fibres and reduces their effectiveness. The ceiling gets even more attention. Up in the attic, the contractor blows loose cellulose, shredded newspaper treated with boric acid that makes it fire-resistant and unappealing to insects. The blower fills the spaces between joists to a depth of 8 inches, sometimes 10, creating a blanket of insulation so thick that standing in the attic feels like being inside a cloud. This insulation doesn't just slow heat transfer, it blocks it. The R value, the measure of thermal resistance, is high enough that the house will feel comfortable with minimal heating and cooling. In winter, heat stays inside instead of bleeding through the walls. In summer, the house stays cool even when the sun beats down on the roof all afternoon. But insulation does more than control temperature. It blocks sound, dampens noise from outside, keeps conversations from travelling between rooms. The house feels quieter, more peaceful, insulated from the world in ways that go beyond simple comfort. The contractor also insulates the pipes, wrapping hot water lines with foam sleeves that keep heat from escaping as water travels from the heater to the faucets. In the basement, he wraps the cold water lines too, preventing condensation that would drip onto the floor and eventually cause problems. The rim joists, where the floor framing sits on the foundation, get special attention. These are natural thermal bridges, places where heat can escape easily, so the contractor packs them with insulation, cutting pieces to fit exactly, making sure every inch is covered. When he's finished, the house is wrapped in a thermal envelope that will perform for decades without degrading. The insulation won't settle, won't compress, won't lose its effectiveness. 70 years from now, someone will open a wall during a renovation and find the insulation still fluffy, still doing its job, still as effective as the day it was installed. The carpenter framing the doorway takes his time, checking each corner with a level, adjusting until the bubble sits perfectly centered. He's not paid by the house, or by the hour in a way, that punishes precision. He's paid to build something right, and right means square, level, plumb, solid. Rush him and he'll tell you to hire someone else. He sets his level on the header, the horizontal beam over the opening, and watches the bubble drift slightly to the left. Not much, maybe a 1/16 of an inch, but enough. He taps the right end with his hammer, gentle strikes that shift the beam incrementally, checking after each tap until the bubble centers perfectly. Only then does he nail it in place, 3 nails on each end, driven home with steady strikes that seat them flush without crushing the wood. The side jambs get the same attention. He checks them with a 4-foot level, holding it against the wood while he studies the bubble. Plumb means straight up and down, not almost plumb, not close enough for government work. Plumb means the bubble is centered between the lines, and he won't move on until it is. At the bottom, where the jambs meet the floor, he notches them carefully to fit around the flooring, cutting with a handsaw that leaves a clean edge. The cuts are precise, measured twice and cut once, the old carpenter's mantra that saves wood and prevents mistakes. He test fits each piece before committing, because fixing mistakes takes longer than avoiding them. The door itself is solid wood, heavy enough that hanging it requires attention to detail. The hinges are mortised into the jamb and the door edge, cut with a chisel until the hinge leaf sits perfectly flush with the wood surface. Each mortise is exactly the right depth, no more, no less, so the door will hang straight and swing freely without binding. He hangs the door on its hinges, drives the screws carefully, making sure each one goes in straight, then steps back to check the reveal, the gap between the door edge and the jamb. It should be even all the way around, 1/8 of an inch, no more, no less. He checks the top, both sides, the bottom, adjusting the hinges slightly until the reveal is perfect. The door swings open and closed smoothly, no rubbing, no sticking, latching cleanly when it closes. The lock set goes in next, bored holes for the knob and the deadbolt, carefully measured so everything aligns perfectly when the door is closed. The strike plate on the jamb is mortised flush, positioned so the latch catches firmly without being too tight. Around the opening, the trim goes on last. The carpenter mitre cuts the corners at exactly 45 degrees, checking each cut with a square before nailing the trim in place. The mitres meet perfectly at the corners, no gaps, no overlap, just clean joints that look like the trim grew that way. Each piece gets finish nails, set below the surface so they'll disappear under putty and paint. When he's finished, the doorway is perfect, square, plumb, level, solid. The door opens and closes the way a door should, smoothly and quietly. The trim is tight and clean. Nothing is temporary or approximate or close enough. Everything is right, because that's the only way this carpenter knows how to work. He moves on to the next opening, to the next detail that needs attention, working at a pace that looks slow to people who don't understand that speed and quality rarely occupy the same space. But the builder knows, and the homeowner will know 70 years from now when this doorway is still perfect, still square, still solid, while modern doorways are sagging and binding and needing adjustment after just a few years. This is craftsmanship. Not fast, not cheap, but right. And right lasts. Nothing in this house has been designed with a planned lifespan. There's no manufacturer hoping you'll need to replace it in 15 years. The water heater is built like a small locomotive. The furnace has parts you can actually see and understand. The doorknobs are solid brass that will develop a patina but never break. Planned obsolescence hasn't been invented yet, and it shows in every corner. The water heater sitting in the basement corner weighs more than most modern refrigerators. The tank is steel, thick gauge steel, lined with glass and protected by a sacrificial anode rod that will corrode instead of the tank itself. The anode can be replaced when it wears out, which means the tank itself can last 30 years, 40 if you're diligent about maintenance. This isn't a disposable appliance designed to fail the moment the warranty expires. This is equipment. The heating element, if you open the access panel, is substantial, built to be removed and replaced if it burns out. The thermostat is mechanical, a simple bimetallic strip that expands and contracts with temperature. Nothing electronic to fail, nothing digital to malfunction. You can understand how it works just by looking at it, and if it stops working, you can fix it with basic tools and common sense. The furnace is the same way. It's a cast iron beast that sits in the basement like it's been there since the foundation was poured. The firebox is thick, designed to withstand decades of heating and cooling cycles without cracking. The blower is a motor and a fan, both serviceable, both built to last. The controls are simple: a thermostat, a gas valve, an igniter. Nothing complicated, nothing proprietary, nothing that requires a computer science degree to troubleshoot. Even the doorknobs are built for permanence, solid brass, not plated pot metal that will flake and corrode after a few years. The mechanism inside is simple: a spindle and a latch, parts that can be disassembled and cleaned and put back together. The screws holding it all in place are brass too, thick enough that they won't strip out if you need to tighten them. These knobs will turn smoothly for decades, developing a warm patina from thousands of hands, wearing in rather than wearing out. The light fixtures are metal and glass, not plastic and wire. The switches on the wall are heavy, substantial, with thick brass contacts that will handle decades of use without burning out. The hinges on the cabinets are solid brass, screwed into solid wood, designed to carry the weight of the door without sagging. Every piece of hardware, every component, every material has been chosen not for how cheap it is, but for how long it will last. This extends to the smallest details. The nails are steel, not coated wire, that will rust and fail. The screws are brass or steel, with threads cut deep enough to hold. The glue is hide glue or casein, natural adhesives that form bonds stronger than the wood itself. Even the caulk around the bathtub is something that will harden and seal and stay sealed for years, not the acrylic squeeze tubes that shrink and crack after one winter. Nobody in 1953 is thinking about replacement cycles or planned obsolescence or how to engineer products that fail on schedule to drive repeat purchases. The manufacturers building these materials are competing on quality and durability, because that's what sells. A water heater that lasts 30 years gets recommended neighbours. A furnace that runs for 40 years builds a company's reputation. Quality is the marketing strategy. Walk through this house 70 years from now, and you'll find most of these original components still working. The water heater might have been replaced once, maybe twice. The furnace might be on its second or third generation. But the doorknobs will still turn smoothly, the hinges will still swing true, and the light switches will still click with that solid, satisfying feel that tells you something was built right. Because in 1953, products were made to be repaired, not replaced. And that simple philosophy is written into every material, every component, every piece of hardware in this house. The basement walls are made of concrete blocks laid by a mason who learned his trade from his father. Each block is set in mortar mixed thick, tapped into place with a trowel handle, checked with a string line. When he's finished, these walls will hold back earth and water pressure for decades without bowing, without cracking, without giving an inch. The blocks themselves are heavy, dense, made with more cement and less air than modern blocks. When you lift one, you feel the weight immediately solid and substantial in a way that makes you trust it instinctively. These aren't the lightweight blocks that will be manufactured later, the ones filled with so much air they almost float, the ones that crumble if you drop them wrong. The mason starts at the corner, laying the first course directly on the footer. That thick concrete base poured weeks ago and cured hard as bedrock. He spreads a bed of mortar, furrows it with his trowel to create suction, then sets the first block. He taps it with the trowel handle, checking it with his level, adjusting until it sits perfectly level and plumb. This corner block is critical. Everything else follows from it. He builds up the corner 4 or 5 courses high, stepping each block back to create a lead, a guide for the rest of the wall. The other corners get the same treatment, built up carefully, checked obsessively, because once the corners are right, the wall between them is just a matter of following the string line. The string goes up, stretched tight between corner blocks, marking the top edge of the next course. The mason butters the end of each block with mortar, sets it in place, taps it level with the string. The mortar squeezes out from the joints as the block settles, and he scrapes off the excess with his trowel, a quick, practiced motion that wastes nothing. Each joint is packed full, no gaps, no voids where water could penetrate. The mason knows that mortar isn't just glue holding the blocks together. It's a system, a barrier, a structural element that makes the wall stronger than the sum of its parts. He tools the joints as he goes, running a jointer along each one to compress the mortar and create a slight concave that sheds water. At the corners, he alternates the orientation of the blocks, creating an interlocking pattern that adds strength. Where a window opening needs to be left, he installs a steel lintel, a beam that carries the weight of the blocks above across the opening. The lintel sits in mortar beds on both sides, bearing on at least 8 inches of wall, enough support that it will never sag or fail. The top of the wall gets special attention. A bond beam, a course of blocks with the cores filled solid with concrete and reinforced with rebar, ties everything together and provides a solid bearing surface for the floor joists that will sit on top. The mason strikes this course especially carefully, making sure the top is level all the way around the perimeter, because any variation here will complicate the framing. When he's finished, the walls are plumb, level, solid, and strong. The mortar joints are crisp and uniform. The corners are perfectly vertical. The whole assembly looks like it could hold back an ocean, and in a way that's exactly what it's designed to do, holding back the earth pressing against it, the water table trying to seep through, the slow, patient pressure of decades. These walls will still be perfect 70 years from now, still plumb, still solid, still doing their job without complaint. The mason who built them will be long gone, but his work will remain, a monument to the idea that some things should be built to last forever. Inside the walls, where no camera will ever see, the builder adds blocking between studs, reinforces corners, doubles up headers over windows. These aren't code requirements. These are the things you do when you believe buildings should be solid, when you understand that the hidden work matters just as much as the visible work, when your reputation depends on houses that don't fall apart. The blocking goes in between studs at mid-height, short horizontal pieces that prevent the studs from twisting, that provide backing for drywall or plaster, that add rigidity to the wall. It's extra work, extra lumber, extra time, but the builder doesn't question it. This is how you build walls that stay straight, that don't develop waves and ripples as the house settles and ages. At the corners where 2 walls meet, he doesn't just nail 2 studs together and call it good. He builds a corner post, 3 studs assembled with blocking between them, creating a solid column that gives both walls something substantial to attach to. The corner will be rock solid, won't flex when you lean against it, won't develop cracks in the plaster where walls meet ceiling. Above each window and door opening, the header is doubled up, 2 2x10s or 2x12s sandwiched together, even though a single board would probably be enough for the span. The builder knows that headers carry the weight of everything above them, that they're working every moment, and that doubling them is cheap insurance against sagging and settling. The joints where walls meet ceiling get extra attention too. Backing blocks go in, nailers that give the ceiling material something solid to attach to, that prevent cracks from forming at this stress point. Modern builders skip this step, and you can see the result in every house built in the last 30 years. Cracks running along the ceiling line, gaps opening up as the house moves and settles. Even the fire blocking, the horizontal pieces required by code to slow the spread of flames up through the wall cavities, is installed carefully, cut to fit snug between studs, nailed firmly in place. The builder knows that in a fire these pieces might buy the family precious minutes to get out, and that's enough reason to install them right. Where plumbing or electrical runs through studs, he adds metal plates to protect the pipes and wires from wayward nails during finishing. These plates are thin galvanized steel, nailed over the holes drilled through framing, ensuring that nobody hanging drywall or nailing trim will accidentally puncture a pipe or sever a wire. It's a small detail that prevents catastrophic problems. At the bottom of walls, the plates that sit on the subfloor are treated lumber or redwood, resistant to moisture and rot. Even though they'll be covered and protected, even though they'll probably never get wet, the builder uses rot-resistant material, because that's what you do when you're building for the long term. The subfloor itself gets glued as well as nailed, a bead of construction adhesive on every joist before the plywood goes down. This isn't code, isn't required, but it eliminates squeaks, stiffens the floor, creates a connection that won't work loose over time. It's the kind of detail nobody will notice until they walk through the house 70 years later and realize the floors don't squeak. All of this hidden work, these details that nobody photographs, that don't show up in the final inspection, that the homeowner will never see, this is what separates houses that last from houses that fall apart. It's the measure of a builder's integrity, the proof that quality matters even when nobody's watching. Because the builder knows something that modern construction has forgotten. The hidden work is the important work, and cutting corners where nobody can see is the fastest way to build a house that won't stand the test of time. Before the hardwood goes down, there's a subfloor of thick planks laid diagonally across the joists, each board nailed every 6 inches. It's overkill by modern standards, excessive, wasteful even. But when you walk across this floor 60 years later, it won't bounce, won't sag, won't squeak. It will feel like walking on something that was built to stay put. The subfloor boards are 1x6s, real 1x6s that measure a full inch thick, not the 3/4 inch nominal lumber that will become standard later. They're tongue and groove on the edges, each board locking into the next, creating a continuous surface that acts as a single structural unit rather than a collection of individual pieces. The carpenter starts in one corner, laying the first board at a 45-degree angle to the joists. This diagonal installation is crucial. It prevents the joints in the subfloor from lining up with the joints in the finish floor that will go on top, eliminates any possibility of the 2 layers telegraphing through to each other. It also adds tremendous rigidity, turning the floor into a giant diagonal brace that stiffens the entire structure. Each board gets nailed to every joist it crosses, 2 nails per joist, driven by hand with a hammer that has weight and balance. The carpenter doesn't use a nail gun, doesn't rely on air pressure and friction to seat the nails. He drives each one home with 3 or 4 solid strikes, feeling when the nail is flush, when it's properly seated without being overdriven. The boards are fitted tightly together, each tongue fully seated in the groove before nailing. The carpenter uses a block and hammer to tap them into place, forcing them tight, eliminating any gaps. When the floor is finished, you won't be able to slide a knife blade between boards anywhere in the room. At the walls, where the subfloor meets the perimeter, the boards are cut to fit precisely, following the line of the wall, leaving just enough gap for expansion without creating voids that would compromise the structure. Each cut is made with a handsaw, measured carefully, test fit before the final cut commits the board. The diagonal installation means more cutting, more waste, more labour, but the results are worth it. The floor is rigid, solid, completely resistant to deflection. Walk across it, and you feel the difference immediately. There's no bounce, no give, no sense that you're walking on something suspended between supports. It feels like walking on a concrete slab. This rigidity eliminates squeaks. Squeaks happen when boards move against each other or against nails. Friction, creating noise. But these boards aren't moving. They're held too tightly, nailed too securely, fitted too precisely. The entire floor acts as a single, structural diaphragm, each board supporting its neighbours, the whole assembly locked in place. When the hardwood floor goes on top, it will have a perfect surface to bear on, flat and solid and completely stable. The finish floor won't have to do any structural work. It can just sit there and look beautiful, supported by a subfloor that's doing all the heavy lifting. 70 years from now, when someone renovates the house and pulls up the hardwood to refinish it, they'll discover this subfloor underneath, still tight, still solid, still perfectly flat. They might marvel at the diagonal installation, at the tongue and groove boards, at the sheer amount of lumber and labour that went into something nobody was ever supposed to see. And they'll understand, maybe for the first time, why this old house feels so solid underfoot, why the floors don't squeak or bounce, why everything feels substantial and permanent in a way that modern houses somehow never do. The floor joists in this house are actual 2x10s, not the engineered lumber that will be invented later, the kind that's more glue than wood. These are solid beams cut from old-growth timber, dense enough that you'd struggle to drive a nail through them, spaced 16 inches apart, because that's what you do when you want floors that don't bounce when someone walks across the room. Each joist is hand-picked at the lumber yard, the builder walking through the stacks, sighting down each board, rejecting any that show excessive crown or twist. He's looking for straight-grained lumber, wood that grew slowly and evenly, boards that will stay true after they're installed. The rejected boards go back in the pile for someone less particular. These boards go on his truck. At the site, the joists are laid out across the sill plate, that pressure-treated board that sits on top of the foundation and provides a bearing surface for the framing. Each joist is set on layout, 16 inches on centre, measured from the centre of one joist to the centre of the next. This spacing is sacred, unchanged for generations, the product of trial and error that determine the optimal balance between material cost and structural performance. The builder checks the crown of each joist before installing it, that slight bow that exists in almost every board. He makes sure the crown points up, so the weight of the floor will flatten it rather than exaggerate it. It's a small detail that makes a significant difference in how the floor performs over decades. Each joist is toe-nailed to the sill plate, 3 nails driven at an angle through the joist into the plate below. The builder drives them carefully, angling the nails so they bite deep into both pieces of wood, creating a connection that's mechanically sound. No hurricane clips, no metal hangers, just wood joined to wood with steel nails driven by hand. At the centre of the span, where the joists bear on a beam or bearing wall, he adds solid blocking, short pieces of 2x10 cut to fit snugly between the joists. This blocking prevents the joists from twisting, from rotating under load, and it transfers weight between adjacent joists, so the floor acts as a unified system rather than a collection of individual members. The joist spacing and size are deliberately over-engineered for typical residential loads. These joists could handle a live load twice what's required by code, could support a grand piano in every room without deflecting noticeably. The builder knows that stiff floors feel better underfoot. that bounce and deflection create the sense that something isn't quite right, even if everything is technically adequate. At the perimeter, where the joists meet the rim joist, that board that caps the ends and creates the edge of the floor platform, everything is aligned carefully. The top edge of every joist is flush with the top of the rim, creating a continuous flat surface for the subfloor. Any joist that's slightly high gets planed down. Any joist that's slightly low gets shimmed up. The result is a perfectly flat surface, no humps or dips, ready for the subfloor. The rim joist itself is doubled, two 2x10s nailed together, creating a rigid perimeter that won't flex or bow. This doubled rim joist acts as a beam, distributing any concentrated loads along the edge of the floor, preventing the kind of sagging that happens in modern construction, where single rim joists gradually give way under the weight of exterior walls. When the subfloor goes on, it will transform this grid of individual joists into a single structural diaphragm, locking everything together, making the floor system work as a unified whole. But even before the subfloor, even with just the joists installed, you can walk across this floor and feel how solid it is, how little it gives, how much confidence it inspires. This is a floor that will support anything the homeowners want to put on it, will last longer than the house itself, will still be structurally sound when someone's great-grandchildren are arguing about whether to renovate or rebuild. The siding going on this house is wood, thick clapboards that overlap like shingles, each one primed and painted before installation. Behind it, there's tar paper that actually repels water, not the house wrap that will be invented later and torn by every strong breeze. This exterior will face 50 years of rain, snow, sun, and wind, and when someone finally decides to replace it, they'll find the sheathing underneath still dry and solid. The clapboards are cedar or pine, 3/4 of an inch thick at the butt edge, tapering to a thin edge at the top. Each board is 12 to 16 feet long enough to span most walls without joints. They arrive from the mill already primed on all surfaces, front, back and edges, sealed against moisture before they ever see the weather. Before installation, each board gets a finish coat of oil-based paint, white or cream or whatever colour the homeowner chose, applied generously and allowed to dry completely. This pre-painting is critical. Once the siding is installed, the overlapped sections will be protected, sealed from weather without needing to be reached by a brush. The tar paper goes on first, heavy felt saturated with asphalt, rolled out horizontally across the sheathing. Each course overlaps the one below by 6 inches, creating a redundant waterproof barrier. The paper is tacked in place with roofing nails, just enough to hold it until the siding goes on. Where the paper wraps around corners or meets windows, it's cut and folded carefully, ensuring complete coverage with no gaps. The siding installation starts at the bottom, the first course nailed directly over a starter strip that kicks the bottom edge out to match the angle of the courses above. Each clapboard overlaps the one below by at least an inch, creating a weather-resistant surface where water runs down and off without finding any horizontal surfaces to sit on. The carpenter nails each board at the studs, one nail per stud, driven through the board just above where the next course will overlap it. This way the nail penetrates only one board, not two, allowing each board to expand and contract independently with moisture and temperature changes. The nails are galvanized, resistant to rust, and they're driven flush but not overdriven, snug against the wood without crushing it. At the corners, the siding meets corner boards, vertical trim pieces that protect the end grain and create a finished edge. These corner boards are installed first, plumb and straight, and the siding butts against them, each cut end sealed with paint before installation. The result is clean, crisp, protected from water infiltration. Around windows, the siding tucks under the window trim, which extends past the siding and acts as a drip edge, directing water away from the joint. Every detail is designed with water management in mind. Every joint is positioned to shed water rather than collect it. Every edge is protected and sealed. The overlap system means that wind-driven rain can't penetrate. Water might get behind the first layer, but the second layer stops it. Even if moisture gets past the siding, the tar paper sheds it to the outside before it can reach the sheathing. Multiple barriers, redundant protection, the philosophy that one layer might fail but two won't. This siding will weather beautifully, developing a patina that adds character rather than detracts from appearance. The paint will need refreshing every 10 years or so, but the wood underneath will remain sound, protected by the initial prime coat that sealed the grain. When UV light and weather finally degrade the surface, a pressure washer and fresh paint will restore it completely. 50 years from now, when someone decides the siding has served its time and should be replaced, they'll pull it off and find the tar paper still intact, still doing its job. The sheathing underneath will be dry, solid, showing no signs of water damage or rot. The siding did its job, protected the structure, proved that simple materials installed correctly can outlast complicated systems installed poorly. The doors are solid wood, heavy enough that closing one requires actual effort, hung on hinges that could support twice their weight. The frames are made from lumber that won't warp or twist because it was allowed to dry properly before milling. 70 years from now, these doors will still close flush, still latch properly, still do the one-job doors are meant to do without drama or adjustment. Each door is built from solid wood panels, not the hollow core doors that will dominate the market in 20 years, those doors that are essentially cardboard wrapped in veneer. These are 5-panel doors, traditional design, with vertical stiles and horizontal rails joined with mortise and tenon joints. The panels floating in grooves that allow them to expand and contract with humidity. The wood is pine or fir, kiln-dried to the correct moisture content, then allowed to acclimate in the shop before milling. This acclimation is crucial. Wood moves with moisture, and wood that hasn't stabilized will warp and twist after installation. These doors were given time to reach equilibrium with the ambient humidity, time to stop moving before they were cut and assembled. The finish is multiple coats of varnish or paint, sanded between coats, building up a protective layer that seals the wood and gives it depth and richness. The final coat is rubbed out to a satin finish that's smooth to the touch, that shows no brush marks or imperfections. These doors are furniture, treated with the same care and attention as any piece of fine woodworking. The hanging is where craftsmanship really shows. Each hinge is mortised into both the door and the jamb, the recess cut precisely so the hinge leaf sits flush with the surface. The carpenter uses a chisel to cut these mortises, working carefully to achieve the correct depth, checking repeatedly to ensure the fit is perfect. The hinges themselves are solid brass, heavy gauge, with thick pins that won't wear or bend. Each hinge has 5 knuckles, more than necessary but providing extra strength and smoother operation. The screws are brass, matching the hinges, with threads cut deep enough to grip firmly in the wood. When the door is hung, the carpenter adjusts it carefully, shimming behind the hinges if needed to achieve perfect alignment. The gap between the door and the jamb, called the reveal, should be consistent all the way around, 1/8 of an inch, narrow enough to look tight but wide enough to prevent binding, as the wood moves with seasons. The latch is a mortise lock set, installed in a pocket cut into the edge of the door. The mechanism is entirely contained within the door, nothing protruding, everything flush and clean. The faceplate is mortised, flush with the door edge. The strike plate on the jamb is mortised flush with the jamb face. When the door closes, the latch engages with a solid click that speaks of precise alignment and quality hardware. The operation is smooth, effortless. The door swings on its hinges without binding, without squeaking, hanging perfectly plumb so it stays wherever you leave it, open or closed or anywhere in between. The latch catches cleanly without rattling or requiring force. Everything works the way it should, the way it was designed to work, the way it will continue to work for decades. This isn't complicated technology. It's simple mechanical devices, precision-made and carefully installed. But that simplicity and precision are why these doors will still be working 70 years from now, while modern doors are sagging, binding, refusing to latch, needing adjustment and replacement. Because quality doesn't require complexity. It requires care, good materials and attention to detail. This door has all three, visible in every panel, every joint, every piece of hardware. It's a door that will outlast everyone who walks through it. The kitchen cabinets aren't particle board boxes covered in laminate. They're made from solid wood by a Finnish carpenter who cuts dovetail joints for the drawers and uses real wood glue that will outlast the house itself. The doors hang on brass hinges that will never sag. The shelves are thick enough to hold cast iron without bowing. These aren't temporary, these are furniture. The carpenter builds these cabinets in his shop, not on site where dust and weather and rushed schedules compromise quality. He starts with solid maple or oak, kiln-dried lumber that he's allowed to acclimate in his shop for weeks before cutting. The wood is stable, predictable, ready to be worked without surprises. The cabinet boxes are joined at the corners with dado joints, grooves cut into one piece that accept the edge of another, glued and screwed for a connection that's both mechanical and chemical. The backs are solid wood panels, not the thin plywood or cardboard that will become standard later, fitted into rabbited grooves that hold them firmly while allowing seasonal movement. The drawers are works of art, traditional dovetail joints at each corner, the interlocking pins and tails cut by hand with a saw and chisel, fitted so precisely that they slide together with gentle pressure and hold without glue. These joints are stronger than the wood itself, will never pull apart, will survive decades of daily use without loosening. The drawer bottoms are solid wood panels, floating in grooves cut into the drawer sides, allowed to expand and contract with humidity. The panels are thick enough that they won't warp or sag even when loaded with heavy utensils. The drawer slides are wood on wood, the drawer sides riding in grooves cut into the cabinet frame, smooth and tight and needing no maintenance beyond an occasional rub with wax. The cabinet doors are frame and panel construction, the same technology used in the entry doors but scaled down. Vertical stiles and horizontal rails, mortised and tenoned at the corners with panels floating in grooves. The grain is carefully matched, each door showing consistent figure, the wood selected for beauty as well as stability. The hinges are solid brass, mortised flush into both the door and the face frame, adjusted so the doors hang perfectly, close with a satisfying snugness, stay closed without catches or magnets. The carpenter spends hours on the doors, adjusting each one until the reveals are perfect, until they all align in a way that speaks of precision and care. The finish is multiple coats of varnish, hand-rubbed between coats to achieve a depth and warmth that spray finishes never match. The final surface is smooth as glass, rich and glowing, bringing out the natural beauty of the wood grain. This finish will protect the wood for decades, will develop a patina that adds character rather than detracts from appearance. Inside the cabinets, the shelves are thick, 3/4-inch solid wood, wide enough to span from front to back without support. They rest on adjustable pins, brass or steel, set into holes drilled precisely with a template that ensures all the holes align perfectly. The shelves can be moved up or down to accommodate different storage needs, but they're so well fitted that they look permanent wherever they're placed. The installation is the final test of quality. The carpenter levels each cabinet carefully, shims where necessary, screws them together and to the wall with a precision that makes them feel like built-ins rather than furniture. The face frames align perfectly, creating continuous lines across multiple cabinets. The doors, when closed, form a unified surface with consistent reveals and perfect alignment. These cabinets will be here 70 years from now, still solid, still beautiful, still functioning exactly as designed. The drawers will still slide smoothly, the doors will still close properly, the shelves will still hold cast iron without complaint. They're furniture, built to furniture standards, expected to last as long as the house itself. The staircase is built into the house like it's load-bearing, which in a way it is. Each tread is thick oak, notched into stringers made from 2x12s. The whole assembly is wedged, glued, and nailed so thoroughly that it becomes part of the structure. When you climb these stairs 50 years from now, they won't creak, won't bounce, won't feel temporary. They'll feel like what they are, permanent. The stringers, those diagonal beams that support the stairs, are laid out with careful precision. The carpenter uses a framing square and a pencil, marking the tread and riser cuts on each stringer, checking and rechecking to ensure every measurement is exact. The rise and run must be consistent from bottom to top. Any variation creates a trip hazard, a step that feels wrong when you're climbing in the dark. The cuts are made with a handsaw following the pencil lines exactly, creating notches that the treads will rest in. These aren't cleats screwed to the face of the stringer, the cheap method that will become common later. These are structural notches cut into solid 2x12 lumber, creating a rigid connection between tread and stringer. Before assembly, the carpenter applies glue to every joint. Thick beads of wood glue that will create a chemical bond stronger than the wood fibres. The treads are set into their notches, pressed firmly to spread the glue, then secured with nails driven at angles to prevent withdrawal. Wedges are driven from underneath, forcing the treads tight against the stringers, eliminating any gaps. The risers, the vertical boards between treads, are installed the same way, glued and nailed into rabbets cut into the back of each tread and the front of the tread below. The risers aren't just cosmetic, they add tremendous rigidity to the staircase, preventing the treads from twisting or moving independently. The entire assembly is installed as a unit, lifted into place and secured to the floor at the bottom and the header at the top. Blocking is added behind the stringers, connecting them to the wall framing, making the staircase part of the building structure rather than furniture sitting in an opening. The handrail is solid wood, 2 inches in diameter, smooth and comfortable to grip. It's supported by balusters every 6 inches, each one mortised into the tread and the underside of the rail, creating a rigid assembly that won't rack or wobble. The newel posts at the bottom and top are 4x4 solid lumber, through bolted to the framing, capable of supporting the weight of the entire staircase if necessary. The finish is the same as the floors, multiple coats of varnish that protect the wood and bring out its natural beauty. The treads are finished especially carefully, with extra coats on the wear surface, because these will see constant traffic and need maximum protection. The result is a staircase that feels absolutely solid underfoot. Each step is rock steady, no bounce, no flex, no sense that you're trusting your weight to something that might give way. The handrail is firmly attached, providing real support rather than decorative suggestion. The whole assembly feels like it grew there, like it's as permanent as the foundation. 50 years from now, these stairs will still be perfect. The treads won't creak, the rail won't wobble, the finish will be worn in the centre of each tread, showing the path of millions of footsteps, but the structure underneath will be unchanged, still solid, still safe, still doing its job without complaint. The attic isn't a forgotten dead space. It has proper ventilation, gable vents that actually move air, soffit vents that pull in fresh air, a ridge vent that lets hot air escape. The rafters are exposed, solid, visible, and when you climb up here decades later, you won't find mould or rot or any sign that moisture ever got trapped. The house knows how to breathe. The ventilation system is simple but effective, based on the principle that hot air rises and cool air sinks. The soffit vents, installed in the underside of the roof overhang, allow cool outside air to enter the attic at the lowest point. This air warms as it moves through the attic space, rises naturally to the peak, and exits through the gable vents or ridge vent at the top. The soffit vents are continuous, running the entire length of the overhang, not the individual circular vents that will become common later and provide inadequate airflow. The carpenter cuts slots between the rafters, covers them with screen to keep out insects, creates openings that allow unrestricted air movement. The gable vents are large, louvered openings at each end of the attic, positioned as high as possible to exhaust the warmest air. The louvers are angled to prevent rain from entering while allowing air to flow freely. Each vent is screened behind the louvers, double protection against insects and birds that might otherwise nest in the attic. The ratio of vent area to attic floor area is generous, more than code requires, because the builder understands that adequate ventilation is cheap insurance against a host of problems. Moisture is the enemy of attics, and ventilation is the defense. Inside the attic, the rafters are exposed, visible from below, solid 2x8 or 2x10 lumber, running from ridge to wall plate. There's no ceiling covering them, no attempt to finish the space or make it look like living area. This is utility space, honest and functional, and the exposed framing makes it easy to inspect, easy to spot any problems before they become serious. The roof sheathing, visible from below, is solid board, not plywood, 1x6s or 1x8s running perpendicular to the rafters. You can see the gaps between boards, tiny cracks that allow the roof to breathe, that prevent moisture from being trapped between sheathing and shingles. This breathability is crucial. Moisture will get into the attic from the living space below from occasional roof leaks from condensation. The ventilation system removes it before it can cause damage. The insulation on the attic floor allows the attic to be cold in winter, the same temperature as outside. This is intentional. A cold attic means heat isn't escaping from the living space below. It means the roof stays cold in winter, preventing ice dams from forming. It means the ventilation system can work efficiently, moving air without fighting against heat rising from below. In summer, the attic gets hot, very hot, but the ventilation system prevents it from becoming an oven. Hot air exits as fast as it forms, replaced by cooler air from the soffits, maintaining a flow that prevents heat from building up to levels that would damage the roof or radiate into the living space below. The builder checks the attic before closing it up, walking the rafters, inspecting every joint, every connection, making sure nothing was missed. He looks for any sign of roof leaks, any gaps in the sheathing, any place where moisture might enter. Finding nothing, satisfied that the space is properly ventilated and protected, he moves on. 70 years later, someone will climb into this attic during a home inspection and find it exactly as it was left. The rafters will be solid, dry, showing no signs of rot or insect damage. The roof sheathing will be intact, the ventilation system still working, the space still breathing the way it was designed to breathe. Because a house that breathes is a house that lasts. The basement floor is poured concrete over gravel, sloped slightly toward a drain that actually drains. The walls are sealed with parging so thick it looks like plaster. There's a sump pump installed not because basements are expected to flood, but as insurance against the unexpected. This basement will stay dry through storms that turn modern basements into swimming pools. The gravel base under the concrete is 4 inches deep, maybe 6, laid carefully and compacted before the pour. This isn't decorative stone. This is drainage, a layer that allows water to move horizontally toward the drain tile around the foundation perimeter, rather than building up pressure against the floor. The gravel also breaks capillary action, prevents groundwater from wicking up through the concrete the way it does in slabs poured directly on clay. The concrete itself is thick, 4 inches minimum, reinforced with wire mesh that's pulled up into the middle of the pour as it's placed. The mix is dense, properly proportioned, poured all at once so there are no cold joints where separate pours meet and create weak spots. The surface is finished smooth but not polished, practical rather than decorative, sloped subtly toward the floor drain in the centre or corner. That drain is connected to drain tile, perforated pipe that runs around the interior perimeter of the foundation just inside the footing. Water that seeps through the foundation walls runs down to the footing and into this tile, which carries it to a sump pit or out to daylight if the lot slopes enough to allow it. The system is gravity-powered, no pumps required under normal conditions, simple and reliable. The walls get special attention. After the concrete or block has cured, a mason applies parging, a thick coat of cement mortar troweled smooth over the interior surface. This parging seals the small voids and imperfections in the foundation wall, creates a continuous waterproof surface, and provides a finished appearance that makes the basement feel less like a hole in the ground and more like usable space. On the exterior, below grade, the foundation walls are coated with tar or asphalt emulsion, thick black, waterproofing that seals the concrete against groundwater. This coating is applied hot, brushed on generously, built up to 1/8 of an inch thick in places. It's not pretty, but it's effective, creating a barrier that water can't penetrate. The sump pump sits in a pit lined with concrete tile, a hole about 18 inches in diameter and 2 feet deep, located at the low point of the basement. The pit has holes in the bottom that allow water to enter, and it's connected to the perimeter drain tile so any water in the system eventually makes its way here. The pump is commercial grade, cast iron, designed to run for decades without attention. Under normal conditions, the sump pit stays dry, the drain tile carrying water away before it can accumulate. But during heavy rains or spring thaw, when the water table rises or the ground becomes saturated, water enters the pit and the pump activates, lifting the water up and out through a discharge pipe that carries it away from the foundation. The system is redundant, multiple layers of protection working together. The gravel base drains water before it can build up pressure. The drain tile collects what gets through. The waterproofing on the walls keeps it out of the basement. The parging seals the interior. And if all else fails, the sump pump removes whatever water makes it into the pit. This basement will stay dry through situations that would flood modern basements. The water table can rise. The ground can become saturated. Rain can fall for days. The systems in place will handle it, will keep the basement dry and usable, will protect the foundation from the hydrostatic pressure that cracks walls and heaves floors. 70 years from now, this basement will still be dry. The concrete floor will show no signs of water damage. The walls will be solid, uncracks, intact. The drain system will still work, and whoever owns the house will take it for granted, unaware of the careful engineering and multiple redundant systems that keep their basement dry while their neighbours are running shop vacs and fighting mould. There's no inspection checklist making sure every detail meets the minimum requirement. There's just a builder who learned his trade during the Depression, who understands that his reputation lives in every house he builds. Who knows that cutting corners means living with shame when you drive past your work 5 years later and see it falling apart. He learned from his father, who learned from his father, a chain of knowledge passed down through generations before anyone thought to write it into codebooks and inspection protocols. The standards exist in his hands, in his eye, in the automatic way he checks a corner for square or sights down a board for straightness. These aren't rules he follows because he has to. These are principles he believes in because he's seen what happens when you ignore them. He remembers houses from the 20s that are still solid, still standing, still worth maintaining. He remembers houses thrown up quickly during the war that are already showing problems, siding pulling loose, floors sagging, roofs leaking. The difference isn't the materials, the difference is the care, the attention, the unwillingness to accept anything less than right. When he frames a wall, he doesn't stop at code minimum. He adds blocking because walls should be rigid. He doubles headers because they carry weight. He uses straight lumber because crooked lumber stays crooked. These decisions aren't required by any inspector. They're required by his own sense of what quality means. When he installs windows, he doesn't just shim them level and nail them in place. He checks them with a level and a square. He makes sure they operate smoothly before securing them. He flashes them properly, even though no inspector will ever see the flashing, because he knows that water damage starts with details nobody bothered to get right. His pride is invested in work that nobody sees. The blocking between studs that stiffens walls, the extra insulation around pipes, the careful caulking of every gap, the way he sweeps up at the end of each day and stacks materials neatly instead of leaving chaos. These details don't appear on punch lists or inspection forms, but they matter to him because his name is on this house. He works at a pace that looks slow to people who don't understand that speed and quality rarely coexist. He measures twice, cuts once, checks his work before moving on. He doesn't leave problems for someone else to fix. He doesn't install something wrong knowing it will pass inspection. He does it right because doing it wrong isn't acceptable to him, regardless of whether anyone else would notice. His standards come from a different era, a time when your reputation was built over decades and destroyed overnight. Word travels in small communities. People know who builds quality and who cuts corners. A house that falls apart damages more than the homeowner's investment. It damages the builder's name, and in his world, a damaged reputation means lost work, lost respect, lost standing in the community. So he builds every house like his own family will live in it, because in a way they do. His reputation lives there. His pride lives there. His self-respect is written into every joint, every connection, every detail that was done right when it could have been done quickly. He doesn't talk about quality or craftsmanship. Those are marketing words, used by people who have to convince others that their work is good. His work speaks for itself. Drive past one of his houses in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years. It will still be solid, still square, still standing proof that some people build to last because that's the only way they know how to build. These unwritten standards, these principles that live in his hands rather than in code books, these are what separate houses that last from houses that don't. And 70 years from now, when someone renovates one of his houses and discovers how well it was built, they'll understand that quality never goes out of style and craftsmanship never becomes obsolete. This house will take 4 months to build, maybe 5. Nobody's rushing. The concrete needs to cure, the plaster needs to dry, the paint needs multiple coats. The modern idea that you can frame, side, roof and finish a house in 8 weeks hasn't been invented yet, and it shows in the quality of what gets built when time is treated as an ally instead of an enemy. The foundation is poured in early spring, when temperatures are moderate and the concrete can cure slowly and properly. It sits for 2 weeks before the framing crew arrives, giving the concrete time to reach its design strength, to shrink and settle and stabilize. Rushing this stage creates cracks, creates stress in the foundation that shows up as problems years later. The framing takes 3 weeks, possibly 4, done carefully by a crew that's been working together long enough that they move efficiently without rushing. They frame one section at a time, check their work before moving on, don't leave problems to be fixed later. The walls go up square and plumb. The roof is framed straight and true. Everything is solid before they move to the next phase. When the framing is complete, the house sits for a week while the lumber acclimates, while any movement or settling happens before the exterior goes on. This waiting period seems wasteful to modern sensibilities, but it prevents problems. Lumber moves, houses settle. Better to let it happen now, while adjustments can be made easily, than later when walls are closed and finished. The roof goes on next, shingles installed over several days, work stopping when rain threatens because wet sheathing leads to problems. The roofers take their time, ensuring every shingle is properly aligned, every flashing is correctly installed, every detail is right. A roof installed quickly is a roof that leaks. A roof installed carefully is a roof that lasts. The siding follows, boards installed one at a time, each one painted before installation, fitted carefully around windows and corners. This isn't production work, boards flying up as fast as nailers can fire. This is craft work, each board positioned precisely, checked for level, nailed properly. The crew installs maybe 200 square feet per day, a pace that seems glacial by modern standards, but produces results that last for generations. Inside, the plaster goes on in stages: scratch coat first, then brown coat, then finish coat, with days between each application for drying and curing. The plasterers can't be rushed. Wet plaster applied over wet plaster fails. The schedule accommodates the material's needs, not the other way around. The electrical and plumbing rough-in happens while the plaster is drying, trades working carefully to avoid damaging the framing, running their systems logically and neatly. There's no sense of crisis, no pressure to finish by an arbitrary deadline. The work gets done when it gets done right rather than done fast. The finish work stretches over weeks. Trim is installed carefully, joints fitted precisely, nail holes filled and sanded, cabinets are built and installed with attention to detail. Floors are sanded and finished, multiple coats with drying time between each. Paint goes on walls in multiple thin coats rather than one thick coat, building up a finish that will last. The modern 8-week construction schedule requires cutting corners that aren't obvious until years later. Lumber that hasn't been allowed to acclimate. Concrete that hasn't fully cured before load is applied. Paint that goes on before substrates are properly prepared. Each shortcut saves time now but costs quality forever. This 4 or 5 month timeline isn't waste or inefficiency. It's respect for materials and processes, understanding that some things can't be rushed without consequences. The concrete needs time to cure, the plaster needs time to dry, the paint needs time to harden, the lumber needs time to acclimate. These aren't optional stages that can be compressed or eliminated. They're necessary parts of building something that will last. The result is a house built to standards that seem impossible by modern metrics. But those standards aren't impossible. They're just incompatible with the idea that houses should be built as quickly as possible to maximize profit per unit time. Quality takes time, always has, always will. This house costs $8,000, which sounds like nothing until you remember that the median household income is $3,000 a year. It's expensive, but it's honest expensive, the cost of actual materials and actual skilled labour, not the inflated expensive of modern construction, where half the price tag is profit margin and the other half is paying for materials engineered to fail. Break down that $8,000 and you see where it goes. The foundation takes $1,000, concrete and labour, and the time it takes to do it right. The framing takes $1,200, lumber that's actually dimensional and carpenters who take pride in their work. The roof takes $600, shingles that weigh 3 times what modern shingles do. The siding takes $500, wood that's been properly dried and painted before installation. The plumbing is $400, copper pipe that will last forever, and fixtures built to commercial standards. The electrical is $300, wire and boxes and breakers that are overbuilt by modern standards. The plaster is $800, materials and the skilled labour of plasterers who serve apprenticeships longer than most modern college degrees. The finish work, the trim and doors and cabinets and floors, takes another $2,000. These aren't commodity items ordered from catalogues. These are custom pieces, built by Finnish carpenters who charge for their skill and their time. The hardware alone, the doorknobs and hinges and locks, cost more than entire doors will cost in 50 years. What you're not paying for is planned obsolescence. The water heater isn't designed to fail in 12 years, so you'll buy another one. The furnace isn't built with components that can't be repaired. The windows aren't made from materials that will degrade in sunlight. Everything is repairable, maintainable, built to last indefinitely with a reasonable care. You're also not paying for artificial scarcity or inflated profit margins. The builder makes a fair living, enough to support his family and maintain his reputation, but he's not trying to extract maximum profit from every transaction. The lumberyard prices materials to cover costs and make reasonable profit, not to exploit temporary supply disruptions or market manipulation. The labour is expensive because it's skilled labour, performed by people who spent years learning their trades, who can frame a house that's square and plumb, plaster walls that are smooth and flat, install trim with joints so tight they're nearly invisible. These skills have value, and that value is reflected in what they charge. For a young couple in 1953, saving $8,000 is a multi-year effort. Down payments are substantial, 20% or more, and mortgages stretch over 20 or 30 years. Buying a house is a major life decision, not something done casually or frequently. People expect to buy one house, maybe two in a lifetime, and they expect those houses to last. The expense also reflects different priorities. People spend less on cars, electronics, entertainment, vacations, all the categories that consume modern budgets. Housing takes a larger share of income because housing is seen as fundamental, as wealth building, as something worth investing in properly. And the investment pays off. This $8,000 house will still be standing, still solid, still worth maintaining 70 years later. The materials will have proven their quality. The workmanship will be evident in every corner. The house will have appreciated not just in nominal value, but in real quality, becoming more valuable relative to modern construction because it was built better. Compare this to modern construction, where a house costs $300,000, 6 times the median household income, the same ratio as this 1953 house. But the modern house is built in 8 weeks with engineered materials designed to last 20 years. The lumber is sawdust and glue. The windows are vinyl that becomes brittle. The siding is plastic. The plumbing is quick connect fittings. Everything is designed for minimum code compliance and maximum profit. The 1953 buyer pays 2.5 times their annual income and gets a house that will last a century. The modern buyer pays 6 times their annual income and gets a house that needs major renovations in 30 years. Which is really more expensive? The price of building right isn't higher, it's just honest. It reflects the true cost of quality materials and skilled labour, and the time necessary to do work that lasts. The price of building wrong is hidden, deferred, paid in repairs and replacements and houses that don't last. 70 years from now, someone will buy this house. We'll walk through it with an inspector who keeps saying the same thing. They don't build them like this anymore, and he'll be right. This house will still be standing, still solid, still worth renovating, still proof that there was a time when builders built things to last because that's what you did when you built things. The craftsmanship will be visible in every corner, written in the language of straight lines and solid joints, and materials that refuse to fail. The inspector will point out details that seem excessive by modern standards. The doubled headers over windows, the blocking between studs, the thick subfloor under the hardwood, the copper plumbing with soldered joints, the plaster walls that his hammer bounces off. Each detail will prompt the same observation. They really built these to last. The new owners will marvel at the solid feel of the house. Doors that close with satisfying weight. Floors that don't bounce or squeak. Walls that don't sound hollow when you knock on them. Windows that still operate smoothly after 7 decades. These aren't nostalgic details. These are evidence of building standards that prioritize permanence over profit. They'll open walls during renovation and discover lumber that's still straight, still solid, still doing its job. The studs will be actual 2x4s, not the smaller dimensional lumber used today. The joists will be massive, spaced closer than required, more than adequate for any load. The blocking and bracing will seem excessive until they understand it's why the walls are still perfectly straight. The foundation will be perfect. No cracks, no settling, no signs of movement. The basement will be dry, the waterproofing still effective, the drain system still working. The concrete will be as solid as the day it was poured. Proof that overbuilding the foundation is never waste. They'll appreciate details they never noticed in modern houses. The way the doors hang perfectly without adjustment. The way the floors feel solid underfoot. The way sound doesn't travel between rooms. The way the house stays warm in winter and cool in summer without the HVAC system running constantly. These aren't luxuries. These are the results of building correctly. The renovation will reveal more quality. Electrical connections carefully wrapped and taped. Plumbing runs that make logical sense and can be traced easily. Roof sheathing that's solid board, still dry after decades under the shingles. Insulation that hasn't settled or compressed. Every hidden detail will demonstrate that the original builders cared about work nobody would see. They'll find evidence of the timeline that allowed quality. Saw marks on lumber showing it was cut by hand. Chisel marks in hinge mortises. Trowel marks in plaster. These marks tell stories of craftsmen who took time to do things right, who worked at a pace that allowed precision, who refused to compromise quality for speed. The new owners will choose to renovate rather than rebuild, not just because the house is solid, but because it has character that can't be replicated. The wide trim around doors and windows, the thick baseboards, the heavy doors, the oak floors with their warm patina. These elements have aesthetic value that goes beyond simple function. Their contractor will tell them what they already suspect. You couldn't build this house today at any price. The materials aren't available. The labour doesn't exist. The timeline wouldn't be tolerated. The standards have changed, and not for the better. This house represents a level of quality that's been abandoned in favour of efficiency and profit. As they live in the house, they'll understand why it has lasted. The foundation that refuses to crack, the framing that refuses to sag, the roof that refuses to leak, the plumbing that refuses to fail, every system still performing its function without complaint, without need for replacement, proof that quality never becomes obsolete. They'll drive past modern developments, houses thrown up in weeks, and understand the difference. Those houses are temporary, designed to last just long enough to satisfy the first buyer. This house is permanent, built to outlast everyone who lives in it, built with the assumption that great-grandchildren not yet born would walk these floors and close these doors. The legacy is simple. There was a time when houses were built to last, when builders took pride in their work, when materials were honest and labour was skilled and time was respected. This house is proof, standing solid, still square, still true, still evidence that quality matters, that craftsmanship endures, that some things were built better before we decided speed mattered more than permanence. And 70 years from now, someone else will walk through this house with another inspector who will say the same thing. They don't build them like this anymore, and he'll still be right. The nails going into this house aren't the thin, smooth wire nails that will dominate later decades. These are cut nails, thick steel with rectangular shafts and blunt points, driven by hand with hammers that have weight and balance. Each nail grips the wood fibres like it's angry about being removed, and 70 years from now, when someone tries to pull one out during renovation, they'll need a wrecking bar and genuine effort. Cut nails are manufactured differently from modern wire nails, sheared from steel plate rather than drawn from wire, creating a nail with sharp edges along its length. When driven into wood, these edges cut across the grain, severing fibres that then grip the nail shaft as they try to return to their original position. The holding power is tremendous, several times greater than smooth wire nails of the same size. The carpenter selects nail size based on the application, not just grabbing whatever's in his pouch. For framing, he uses 16s, thick nails 3.5 inches long, 2 per connection, driven at slight angles to resist withdrawal. For sheathing, he uses 8s, shorter but still substantial, spaced 6 inches apart around the perimeter and 12 inches in the field. For trim, he uses finish nails, cut nails with small heads that can be set below the surface and concealed with putty. Each nail is driven by hand, 3 or 4 solid strikes with a 20-ounce hammer. The carpenter has been driving nails since he was old enough to hold a hammer, and his accuracy is absolute. He doesn't miss, doesn't bend nails, doesn't split wood. Each strike seats the nail deeper, the final strike bringing the head flush with the surface, tight against the wood. The sound of hammer on nail rings across the construction site, a rhythmic percussion that speaks of work being done, of a house taking shape. Each strike is deliberate, controlled, efficient. No wasted motion, no excess force, just the practice movement of someone who's driven 10,000 nails and will drive 10,000 more. The nails themselves are galvanized, coated with zinc to resist rust, because the carpenter knows that rust weakens connections, that nails can corrode and fail if they're not protected. The galvanizing adds cost, but it's cost that pays dividends in longevity, in connections that stay strong through decades of exposure to moisture and temperature changes. In areas exposed to weather, around windows and doors, on the exterior siding, the carpenter uses even better protection. Hot-dipped galvanized nails, immersed in molten zinc after manufacturing, coated so thoroughly that the zinc will last longer than the wood it's holding. These nails cost twice what standard nails cost, but the carpenter doesn't question the expense. This is what you use when you're building for permanence. The spacing and pattern of nails follows rules the carpenter learned from his father, rules that have been proven over generations of construction. Nails near the ends of boards are set back from the edge to prevent splitting. Nails through the face of boards are staggered to avoid creating a line of weakness. Nails at connections are placed to maximize holding power, driven at angles when appropriate, doubled when the load requires it. Modern framing nailers will replace this hand-driving, shooting nails with compressed air, faster but less precise. The nails themselves will change, becoming smooth wire, easier to drive but with less holding power. The connections will be adequate for code, sufficient for the expected loads, but lacking the overbuilt quality of these hand-driven cut nails. 70 years from now, during renovation, workers will curse these nails. They'll break pry bars trying to remove them. They'll strip screw heads trying to back them out. They'll eventually resort to cutting through them with reciprocating saws because pulling them is impossible. And while they're cursing, they'll also be impressed, grudgingly admiring the connections that held so well for so long. Because these nails weren't driven to meet minimum standards. They were driven to create connections that would never fail, by a carpenter who understood that a house is only as strong as its weakest connection, and who refused to create weak connections. The legacy of these nails is visible in walls that never racked, in floors that never separated from joists, in trim that stayed tight against walls, in a house that remained solid through 70 years of settling and movement and use. Simple steel fasteners driven by hand, holding with a grip that time couldn't weaken. The paint going on this house isn't the latex that will dominate in 30 years. This is oil-based enamel, thick and glossy, applied with natural bristle brushes that leave almost no marks. Multiple coats, sanded between applications, building up a protective layer that will stand up to decades of weather without peeling or chalking. When you touch it years later, it will still feel smooth, still look deep, still be doing its job. The preparation takes longer than the painting. Every surface is cleaned, sanded smooth, primed properly before the first coat of finish goes on. The painter knows that paint adheres to preparation, not to hope, that shortcuts in prep work show up as failures years later, when the paint begins to peel and blister. The primer is oil-based, formulated to soak into the wood and seal it, creating a barrier against moisture and a foundation for the finish coats. On new wood, the primer goes on thick, filling the grain, raising the fibres. When it dries, the painter sands it smooth with fine sandpaper, removing the raised grain, creating a surface that's glass smooth under his hand. The finish coat is mixed carefully, stirred thoroughly to ensure the pigments are evenly distributed. The painter pours it into his bucket, testing the consistency, adding a few drops of thinner if needed to achieve the perfect flow. Too thick and it won't level properly, will show brush marks, will be difficult to apply smoothly. Too thin and it won't build, will run and sag, will require extra coats. He loads his brush, a 4-inch brush with natural bristles, and applies the paint with long, smooth strokes, working section by section, maintaining a wet edge so the sections blend together without visible overlap. The paint flows from his brush evenly, leveling as it lands, creating a surface that's uniform and smooth. Each coat takes a day to apply and 2 days to dry properly, the oil base needing time to oxidize and harden before the next coat goes on. This isn't the quick-drying latex that will be marketed as progress. Paint that can be recoated in hours but never achieves the hardness and durability of properly cured oil paint. Between coats, the painter sands lightly with fine sandpaper, removing any dust particles or imperfections, creating microscopic scratches that give the next coat something to grip. This sanding isn't optional or cosmetic. It's essential to building up layers that will bond together and perform as a unified system rather than separate coats stacked on top of each other. The final coat is applied with special care, the painter working slowly, checking his work from different angles to ensure the coverage is uniform, the surface is smooth, the gloss is even. This coat will be the one that shows, that the homeowners will see every day, that will represent his work for years to come. On the exterior, where the paint will face weather, he applies an extra coat, building up protection that will withstand sun, rain, snow, temperature cycles. The paint film ends up thick enough to measure 8 to 10 mils, providing real protection rather than cosmetic coverage. The colours are simple, whites and creams and soft greys, not because those are the only colours available, but because those are the colours that age gracefully, that don't fade noticeably, that still look fresh after years of exposure. Bold colours will come later, marketed as modern and exciting, but fading to washed-out disappointment after a few seasons. This paint will last 15 years on the exterior, longer in shaded areas protected from direct sun. When it finally needs repainting, the surface will still be smooth, the old paint providing an excellent base for the new. The wood underneath will be protected, sealed, showing no signs of rot or decay. Interior paint will last even longer, decades in areas that aren't handled frequently, developing a patina that speaks of age and quality rather than wear and neglect. The gloss will remain, the colour will stay true, the surface will clean easily with a damp cloth. 70 years from now, someone will strip paint during renovation and discover layer after layer, each one applied properly, each one still adhering to the one below. They'll count the layers like tree rings, each one representing a generation that maintained the house, that understood paint is protection as well as decoration. The quality will be obvious in every layer. Thick applications, proper adhesion, paint that protected rather than just covered. Evidence of a time when painting was a skilled trade, when painters served apprenticeships and took pride in their work, when the goal was permanence rather than just making it look good for the first few years. The gutters going on this house are thick aluminum, formed on site from coils, seamless runs that extend the entire length of each roof edge. The downspouts are rectangular, substantial, secured to the house with straps every few feet. The whole system is pitched precisely to drain completely, sloped just enough to move water without being visually obvious. 70 years from now, these gutters will still be channeling water away from the foundation, still protecting the house from the slow damage that comes when water is allowed to pool and seep. The gutter installer arrives with a machine mounted on his truck, a portable brake that forms flat aluminum coil into U-shaped gutter profile. He measures each roof edge carefully, cutting the coil to exact length, forming the gutter in one continuous piece. No seams means no leaks, no weak points where sections join and eventually separate. The profile is 5 inches wide, deeper than the 4-inch gutters that will become standard later, with capacity to handle heavy rain without overflowing. The metal itself is substantial, thicker gauge than modern gutters, stiff enough to maintain its shape without additional reinforcement. Before installation, the installer checks the fascia board, that vertical board at the roof edge that the gutter will mount to. It needs to be straight and solid, capable of supporting the weight of the gutter when it's full of water. Any rotten or damaged sections get replaced before the gutter goes on, because the gutter is only as good as what it's attached to. The mounting is critical. The installer snaps a chalk line along the fascia, marking the correct slope, 1/4 inch per 10 feet, just enough to ensure water flows toward the downspouts without making the slope visible from the ground. The gutter brackets go on, every 2 feet screwed firmly into the fascia and the raft details behind it, creating attachments that won't pull loose under load. The gutter hangs from these brackets, supported along its entire length, not just at the ends. This continuous support prevents sagging, ensures the gutter maintains its slope, keeps water moving toward the downspouts. Each bracket is adjusted slightly to maintain the slope line, checked with a level, tightened only after the position is verified. At the corners, the installer meter cuts the gutters, joining them with rivets and sealant, creating connections that are watertight and rigid. These corner joints are potential weak points, so he reinforces them, adds extra sealant, makes sure the water will flow through without finding any gaps to leak through. The downspouts are sized to handle the volume the gutters collect, 3-inch by 4-inch rectangular profile, 1 downspout for every 40 feet of gutter. They're attached to the house with straps screwed into studs, secured firmly enough that they won't pull away when water rushes through them during heavy rain. At the bottom, each downspout has an elbow that directs water away from the foundation, at least 4 feet away, preferably more. Some downspouts connect to underground drain pipes that carry the water even farther, out to the street or to a dry well in the yard. The goal is to keep water away from the foundation, to prevent the pooling and seeping that causes basement moisture and foundation settlement. The installer tests the system before leaving, running a hose on the roof, watching to verify that water flows correctly, that the gutters don't overflow, that the downspouts discharge where they're supposed to. He checks for leaks at the corners and end caps, adds sealant where needed, makes adjustments until everything works perfectly. The gutters are painted to match the trim, usually white, blending with the fascia so they're nearly invisible from the ground. The paint is the same oil-based enamel used everywhere else, applied after installation, protecting the aluminum from oxidation and maintaining the house's unified appearance. Maintenance is minimal. The gutters need cleaning twice a year, spring and fall, removing leaves and debris that accumulate. But the design makes this easy. The gutters are accessible from a ladder, open at the top, no covers or guards to remove. A scoop and a hose clear them completely in an hour. These gutters will last as long as the house, protected by paint, maintained regularly, doing their job without drama or failure. Modern vinyl gutters will come later, marketed as maintenance-free, but becoming brittle in sun, cracking in cold, sagging under load. These aluminum gutters will outlast several generations of vinyl replacements, still straight, still solid, still directing water exactly where it needs to go. The lot around the house is graded carefully, sloped away from the foundation on all sides, ensuring that rainwater flows away from the house rather than toward it. The soil is compacted, settled, planted with grass that will hold it in place. Trees are positioned for shade without being close enough to threaten the foundation with their roots. This isn't decorative landscaping. This is engineering, designed to protect the house from water damage, from settling, from the slow destruction that happens when water and roots are allowed to do what they want. The grading starts during construction, rough grading that establishes the basic slopes before the house is complete. The excavator works carefully, creating a swale around the foundation, a gentle slope that directs surface water away. The slope is consistent, maintained for at least 10 feet from the foundation, ensuring that water can't pool against the basement walls. When the house is complete and the construction equipment is gone, the finish grading happens. Topsoil is spread 6 inches deep, creating a growing medium for grass. But before the topsoil goes down, the subgrade is checked one more time, the slope verified, any depressions filled, any high spots cut down. This subgrade determines how water moves, and getting it right is essential. The topsoil is spread and raked smooth, following the contours of the subgrade, maintaining the slope. Where the ground meets the foundation, the soil is pulled back slightly, creating a small gap that prevents moisture from wicking up into the sill plate. This gap will be filled with gravel later, creating a dry zone that protects the wood framing. The grass seed goes down in late spring or early fall when temperatures are moderate and rain is likely. The seed is a mix of varieties, some that tolerate sun, some that tolerate shade, creating a lawn that will survive in varying conditions. The seed is raked lightly into the soil, just barely covered, then rolled to ensure good seed-to-soil contact. Straw is spread over the seeded areas, a light covering that holds moisture and protects the seed from birds and erosion. The straw will decompose as the grass grows, adding organic matter to the soil, disappearing naturally without needing to be removed. The grass establishes quickly, roots growing deep, binding the soil, creating a mat that holds everything in place. Within a few weeks the yard is green, protected from erosion, sloped properly to drain. This grass will need mowing and occasional watering, but it will prevent the soil from washing away during storms, will maintain the carefully established slopes. Trees are planted strategically, positioned to provide shade without threatening the house. Deciduous trees on the south and west sides, providing shade in summer, allowing sun in winter after the leaves fall. But these trees are planted at least 20 feet from the foundation, far enough that their roots won't interfere with the drain tile or crack the basement walls as they grow. Shrubs are kept even farther from the house, planted along the property lines or in island beds away from the foundation. The area immediately around the house is left open, allowing air circulation, preventing moisture from being trapped against the siding, making it easy to inspect the foundation and spot any problems early. Downspout discharge points are protected with splash blocks, concrete pads that prevent the water from digging holes in the lawn that direct the flow smoothly away from the house. Where water naturally wants to flow, swales are enhanced, made more defined, planted with grass that tolerates wet conditions. The result is a yard that works with the house rather than against it, that protects the foundation from water damage, that maintains proper drainage even during heavy storms. The grading may seem excessive, the slopes more pronounced than necessary, but this over-engineering is what keeps basements dry and foundations stable. 70 years from now, long after the original landscaping has been changed and updated multiple times, the basic grading will still be there, still directing water away from the house, still protecting the foundation. The slopes may be less pronounced, softened by decades of soil movement and settling, but they'll still be effective, still doing the job they were designed to do. Because this landscaping wasn't about curb appeal or property value. It was about protection, about creating conditions where the house could stand for generations without water damage, without settlement, without the slow degradation that happens when water is allowed to pool and seep. Function over form, engineering over aesthetics, protection over decoration. The homeowner receives a simple instruction from the builder. Maintain it, and it will last forever. This isn't marketing, this is truth. The house is built to be maintained, designed with the understanding that buildings need attention, that small problems caught early stay small, that neglect is the enemy of longevity. The builder provides a list, tasks to be done monthly, seasonally, annually, and the homeowner follows it because that's what you do when you own something valuable. The monthly tasks are simple. Walk around the house looking for anything that seems wrong. Gutters sagging or pulling away, siding boards coming loose, cracks in the foundation, windows not closing properly. These aren't repairs yet, just observations, early warnings that something needs attention before it becomes a problem. Seasonal tasks are more involved. In spring, clean the gutters, removing leaves and debris that accumulated over winter. Check the roof for any damaged shingles, any flashing that's coming loose. Inspect the basement for any signs of moisture, any new cracks, any indication that water is getting in. Outside, check that the grading still slopes away from the foundation, that downspouts are directing water properly. In fall, the gutters get cleaned again. Storm windows go up, if the house has them, providing an extra layer of insulation for winter. The furnace is serviced, filters changed, burners cleaned. Outside, faucets are drained and shut off to prevent freezing. Leaves are raked away from the foundation where they might trap moisture. Annual tasks require more skill and investment. Every few years, the house gets painted, maintaining the protective barrier that keeps weather out of the wood. The paint schedule isn't rigid, not every 5 years like clockwork, but as needed, when the surface starts to show wear, when the gloss begins to fade, when water stops beading and starts soaking in. The roof is inspected annually, walking it carefully if the slope allows, looking from a ladder if it doesn't. Missing or damaged shingles get replaced immediately, not next season or when it becomes convenient. A single missing shingle can allow water in, and water in a roof cavity spreads, finds more vulnerable spots, causes damage far beyond the original small problem. Plumbing maintenance is proactive. The shut-off valves under sinks are exercised regularly, turned off and on to prevent them from seizing. The water heater is drained partially each year, removing sediment that accumulates at the bottom. The anode rod is checked every few years, replaced when it's corroded, protecting the tank from rust. The homeowner keeps records, a simple notebook listing what was done and when the roof was last inspected, when the furnace was last serviced, when each room was last painted. These records help establish patterns, help predict when maintenance will be needed, prevent the surprise failures that happen when systems are neglected. The mindset is simple: fix small problems immediately, maintain systems regularly, replace components before they fail rather than after. This approach costs more in the short term, requires discipline and attention, but saves enormously over the life of the house. A loose board fixed today costs pennies. That same board left loose allows water in, causes rot, eventually requires replacing entire sections of siding. The builder's instruction proves accurate. With proper maintenance, the house does last. Not just physically standing, but functioning well, staying solid, remaining comfortable and efficient. The maintenance isn't burdensome, just consistent, and the results are obvious in the house's continued quality. 70 years later, when someone new buys the house, they'll find evidence of this maintenance mindset. Paint records written on the back of closet doors, service stickers on the furnace showing decades of regular maintenance, replacement parts that are period appropriate, indicating problems were fixed thoughtfully rather than with whatever was cheapest or fastest. They'll understand that the house lasted not just because it was built well, but because it was maintained properly. The original quality gave it potential for longevity, but the maintenance realized that potential turned a well-built house into a house that actually lasted. Because buildings don't maintain themselves. They require attention, investment, care. The houses that last are the houses that receive that care, generation after generation, owner after owner, each one understanding that they're stewards rather than just owners, that their job is to pass the house on in good condition to whoever comes next. This maintenance mindset, as much as the original quality, is what separates houses that last from houses that don't, and it's the final lesson in understanding why 1950s homes are still standing while modern homes are falling apart. Quality construction gives you a chance. Proper maintenance makes it last. So tonight, as you settle deeper into your blankets, think about the builders who woke up before sunrise and carried lumber that still smells like the forest. Think about the masons who checked their work twice because their names were written into every wall. Think about the carpenters who measured carefully, who believed that straight lines and solid joints were a form of respect, not just for the homeowner, but for the craft itself. They did not think of themselves as living in a golden age. They were just building houses, mixing concrete, driving nails, doing the work the way their fathers taught them, the way they would teach their sons. They did not know that 70 years later someone would walk through those houses and whisper, "They don't build them like this anymore. They were just trying to do it right." And maybe that is the quiet lesson here, tucked between the studs and joists and foundations that refuse to crack. That quality does not require complexity. It requires care. It requires time. It requires the belief that what you build today should still be standing long after you're gone. So as you drift towards sleep tonight, carrying the memory of plaster walls and copper pipes and floors that did not squeak, maybe hold on to one small thing. Maybe it is the idea of slowing down. Maybe it is the practice of checking your work before moving on. Maybe it is simply the knowledge that permanence is possible, that things can be built to last, that care still matters. History is not always grand. Sometimes it is a foundation poured thick, a nail driven straight, a door that closes flush, a house that refused to fall apart. and that is enough. That has always been enough. Good night.